when you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome into the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. And we have a very special guest in studio today.
Actually, our very first COVID interview.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Our COVID series that we've done here on the Vaccine Conversation podcast. Today, we are welcoming County Supervisor Kirk Uhler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's
great to have you on. I'm really excited to be able to talk to
somebody.
Well,
it's a pleasure. I was excited when you folks reached out, and I'll tell you, my assistant at the county is a huge fan of you guys, and so she actually sent me a note when she heard that we were going to be chatting. She said, "I'm totally fangirling right now." So
that's so great. That's so awesome.
That's cool. Yeah.
It's so good to realize, like, as we see across the nation and in different countries, there are a lot of people wanting to have conversations about the government and about mandates and legislative action. So that's kind of what we do. And we have found over the last several weeks a big discussion here in the coronavirus response, the whole pandemic, the data, and the legislative and the power moves that we've sort of seen by governors and the national organizations, as well as we look at how people are dealing with this. Is this the right way? What are the unintended consequences? Why is the data contradictory, et cetera? And so I've been looking into the data for several weeks, as I like to do. And in what I've come across, there have been a lot of discrepancies, and it's an unpopular opinion. It was one that was unpopular for me on this podcast weeks ago, but I've held to it. And now we're seeing more and more people coming out with the same conclusions. And so, Kirk, you're one of them. I originally saw a video of yours that will kind of go into what you were talking about later, but you're one of the ones that has not been afraid to voice your concerns. And even if that meant getting pushback, which is something we're very familiar with here. And it's not always the easy position to take. So it's and I'm sure you're very aware of that, especially right now. Let me give everybody a little bit of a background. So I found this very interesting. It says you were the second youngest person in California to be elected county supervisor, which is a post that you held in Placer County several years ago, and then again later, and now you've been reelected 3 different times after that. And it says you have a business background working as a chief operating officer, as well as a managing member of a consulting company. I find this really interesting, that specializes in government relations and strategic business communications. So a lot of your background has been in business, and it's also been in dealing with the government. You've obviously been in the position that you are for many years now, and you have a unique understanding of how deep this all runs as it relates to who's in charge and what they're allowed to legally be doing while they're in charge, and what kind of power that these local counties have as it relates to this. This has been a very hot topic lately with these extended lockdowns. So we'll get into all of that. I just want to give everybody a bio. Again, welcome to the show. I'm super happy to have you on here. And Dr. Bob, did you want to start with your first question?
Yeah, Kirk, I guess just for myself, because I don't know, and probably a lot of our audience doesn't know, what is the job description of a county supervisor? Like, what are you in charge of? What do you do kind of on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, that's a great question. So first of all, California has 58 counties. We range from Los Angeles County with just over 10 million people to Alpine County with just over 1,000 people. So it's kind of important to keep that context in mind when we're talking about a state of emergency statewide, because we have a number of counties that have never had a confirmed COVID case, let alone a death. And then we have Los Angeles County that has a lot of cases and a lot of deaths. And so, when we're talking about, and we're having this conversation about local control and moving forward and opening our counties, it's important for people to keep in mind just how diverse the state really is. So county supervisors, each county with the exception of San Francisco is actually a city and county together. The boundary of the city of San Francisco is the same boundary as the county. So they're the one exception. The other 57 counties all have 5 elected county supervisors. We serve 4-year terms. And the role of the counties is to assist with all things criminal justice. So each county has an elected district attorney. We are responsible for the sheriff in the unincorporated areas. So where you have incorporated cities, like in Placer County, the city of Roseville is our largest incorporated city, about 140,000 people. They take care of police protection within the city limits, but if they arrest somebody in the city of Roseville, they're taking them to the Placer County Jail. They'll go to Placer County Superior Court, where they're going to be prosecuted by a Placer County district attorney and defended by somebody from the public defender's office that's contracted with by Placer County. And then if they go to jail, they're going to the Placer County jail. And then once they get out of jail, they're going to be monitored on probation by a Placer County probation officer. So we handle that. We handle health and human services. So all health and welfare programs are run by counties as opposed to cities. And then, of course, we are also responsible for normal public works, our roadways in the unincorporated area, sewers in the unincorporated area. So any place that's not in a city is being served by the counties. And then we handle land use in the unincorporated areas as well. So when development projects come in that's not in a city, it's the county board of supervisors who makes the determination on the land use. So that's broad overview of the kinds of roles and responsibilities we have.
As it relates specifically to COVID-19, then, I guess, what are the specific tasks that you and your department have? And, like what kind of COVID decisions have you guys been making on the local county level?
So each county is required by law to have a public health officer. So the county has to have a public health officer, which reports to the board of supervisors by way of employment. But interestingly, when a state of emergency is declared, the board of supervisors has no say in orders issued by the public health officer. So even though we hire the public health officer, the public health officer can order whatever he or she wants, and the local elected body has no say during the state of emergency at the local level. So that was the case for us. We adopted a resolution early in March when the models were showing millions of Americans dead, and we were worried about our healthcare system being overrun. We did adopt the state of emergency back then. And during that period that we had our locally declared state of emergency, the public health officer was free to issue whatever orders she wanted. And we couldn't countermand her orders. I will tell you that there was one instance where she ordered the closing of golf courses and of she shut down commercial gardening operations. And while we can't countermand her order, we can change her job title to former public health officer. So that message was delivered, and 6 days later, our golf courses were back open.
Wow!
And our commercial gardeners were back at work. So,
right.
So we do have some influence still.
And that only is the case as far as their level of authority. That's only the case during a state of emergency.
Locally declared. So we let our local, in Placer County, we let our locally declared state of emergency expire, and we are not under a locally declared. So the public health officer cannot issue any orders. We are, how do I put this? We are, quote unquote, following the governor's orders. However, we are doing nothing. We're not spending any county resources to enforce the governor's orders.
Okay.
I see. So let me go back to the beginning of April, or the middle of March, actually, when we had this national lockdown. The original timing of this was to be so that we don't overburden the hospital systems. We don't overwhelm the hospitals. And it was for 2 weeks, and everybody was pretty much on board to say, okay, let's do our part. And we're going to make sure we don't see this crazy spike because, hospitals are not going to be able to handle in the ICUs the number that are being projected here. So at what point did you guys realize, and where you are, at what point did you realize that the hospitals were not going to be overwhelmed?
Well, I think I really started getting active with my public pushback around the first part of April. I think that's the first time I kind of opened up in our public session and started saying this is absurd because to your premise, we did this with the understanding that we were going to be overwhelmed. We aren't being overwhelmed, and now we're seeing the human toll that this is taking, not from a COVID body count, but from the unemployment numbers and loss of businesses and loss of savings and all the rest. And that I began to argue back in early April that cost was a greater cost than anything that we were seeing by way of deaths. And so, just to put it in perspective for folks, here in Placer County, we're a county of about 400,000 people. We've had 8 deaths. So on a per 100,000, we're at 2 deaths per 100,000 population. Meanwhile, we've lost 8,000 jobs per 100,000 people. Mm-hmm. So 8,000 people lost their livelihood, and 2 people died for every 100,000 people. So our response, at what point does the cure become worse than the disease?
Right. And then what were you actually seeing in your hospitals? What were the numbers like?
Today, we're at 3 people. Now, in our South County, between Kaiser and Sutter, we have a staffed bed capacity of 668 beds. As of today, we have 3 people in our hospital with COVID and nobody in intensive care. I think we maxed out at one point with 19 people who were hospitalized, COVID related, 19 people and 4 in ICU, and a staffed bed capacity of 668.
Wow. Do the other supervisors, the other 4 supervisors, do they share your direction, as far as where you want the county to go, or do some of them disagree with you and agree more with the governor?
Well, I introduced a resolution 2 weeks ago, calling on the governor to adhere to state law, and which, state law is very clear. It requires that the governor declare an end to the state of emergency at the earliest possible opportunity. I mean, that's the plain language of the law. And so I introduced a resolution where we lay out the facts of what our condition is in Placer County, that, how many people are hospitalized and all the rest, and say that we are clearly not in a state of emergency, and called upon the governor, quoting Government Code Section 8629, which reads, the governor shall, it's not he doesn't have discretion, the governor shall proclaim the termination of a state of emergency at the earliest possible date that conditions warrant. And so I introduced that resolution, and it was passed unanimously.
All right, cool. And what are you hearing from other counties, either near you, maybe counties that are in the same situation as Placer County, which you're in it's great to hear how minimally you guys are being impacted by the actual virus. What are you hearing from similar counties? And actually, are you also in contact with counties that are being more severely hit, and what are those supervisors saying? Like, do you guys communicate together, or are you kind of more on your own?
Well, traditionally, counties operate fairly autonomously.
Right.
I have been in communication with supervisors from around the state since I started kind of beating this drum. People are inquiring of the legal reasoning. But here's, the really interesting part is I had, when making the argument, I pointing at state law, which, I'm happy to get in as deep as you guys want to get into the state law and the governor's authority or lack thereof under the law at this point. I made the allowance that, maybe we have local emergencies on a county by county basis in some areas. Maybe we meet that threshold, but we certainly don't meet the threshold of a state of emergency. Well, just out of curiosity, I went to check, how bad is LA County? Are they truly, we keep hearing about the number of deaths, and remember, there are over 10 million people in that county. So is LA County being disproportionately affected? Are they being quote unquote overwhelmed? Are they in a state of emergency? Well, I went to LA County's own health services department website where they have their COVID-19 dashboard. And for the entirety of the county, the worst day that they had of hospitalizations was April 28th. And on April 28th, they had 1,814 people hospitalized in their beds, in their 70 designated 911 receiving hospitals within the county. They had 1,814 people hospitalized with COVID. On that same day, they had staffed unoccupied beds of 1,850. So they have more staffed unoccupied beds than they do COVID patients. How is even LA County in a state of emergency?
Right.
They're not being overwhelmed.
And they're the majority of cases in California.
Exactly.
Right. And I have also been looking at both, because we're in Orange County. I've also been looking at Orange County and LA County. And it's interesting, too, because they've, according to the LA Times, there's 50% of these deaths that we've seen across the state. And in LA County are in nursing homes as well. And in LA County, it might even be more than 50% because they take the bulk of these statistics that are statewide. And you make a really great point when you talk about universal statewide policy and how that, the same way we argue for universal mandates, let's say just as it relates to the body and saying everybody can have this one particular medicine when we know everybody's body reacts differently. When you have a policy of lockdown across a state as large as California, which is like the size of Italy, right? You have this 40 million people and every county is different, just the way every state is different. And it doesn't make sense that everybody is in a lockdown like New York City because we're not all experiencing what New York City was experiencing. And the same way within our own state, what you guys are experiencing with a population of close to 400,000, like you said, is not the same as LA, nor should every county be punished basically with this type of lockdown because of what's happening in one particular area. And then you look into the data like you're saying, and you find out there really is not an overburdening of the hospital system, which is the only real reason for the lockdown, because we know medically that there is absolutely no way we're going to contain the virus and we're not going to reduce the number of cases. We're just literally spreading them out over time. And so the whole purpose is just to cut that peak only for the hospitals. So what you saw in your hospital county is the same thing that we saw down here. And I did a post on Facebook about this that had actually been shared over 30,000 times because people across the nation were chiming in with what their hospital looked like. And almost everybody was saying the same thing. Hospitals have been completely empty. This has been through March, through April, and I just posted today for an update. I'm curious to see where everybody is at this point. But what you saw is kind of what everybody else saw. And then we paused all of these elective procedures. We paused all of these treatments. Again, it was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to just be something that was going to help our healthcare system. And you're looking at the data in your county saying our system's not overwhelmed. In Orange County, our Board of Supervisors also took a very bold step in fighting back against the lockdown as well by basically, we have some lawsuits going on additionally, and they were fighting back as well because they said, hey, look at the numbers. Our hospital system's not overwhelmed here. And the same way that what you're doing there, people are realizing that the data doesn't match up. And as unpopular as that opinion is, it is data-based. You cannot argue with actual numbers. And so you talked about Governor Newsom and his level of power, and I do want to get into that because he has a certain level of power that works only during a state of emergency. This is talking about the executive branch that is completely uncontested. He does not have to have anything voted on. Nobody else has to agree with it. He can do a lot during this time. And I have a feeling that's why the state of emergency has been extended the way that it is. So how long do you think it's fair for a governor to declare a state of emergency and utilize these powers when we're seeing, of course, the data's not matching up and we have this huge backlash of the small businesses and the unemployed that are being affected by these policies?
Right. Well, it's less what I think is fair. It's more what the law requires. So, in order for the governor to be able to declare a state of emergency, state law is very clear. Article 13 describes the state of emergency, and Section 8625 has a very clear definition. The governor must first find that the circumstances that are described in a different section, Section 8558, exist. And what that describes is that we have a situation like a pandemic, an earthquake, a flood, a fire. We have a situation that is currently or is likely to, and this is the operative phrase that allowed him to meet this finding, or is likely to be beyond the control of the services, personnel, equipment, and facilities of any single county, city and county, or city. So back in early March, when we were all thinking we're going to lose, 2 to 5 million Americans, we were all thinking, yeah, it's likely to overwhelm our system. So he has to be able to make that finding, or is likely to. The second finding he has to be able to make, he finds that local authority is. There's nothing prospective. That is current and temporary. I mean, that is current and snapshot in time. He finds that local authority is inadequate to cope with the emergency. He has to be able to make those two findings at such time that he cannot make those two findings. The law is clear. The governor shall proclaim the termination of a state of emergency at the earliest possible date that conditions warrant. If he can't make the finding today that local authority is inadequate to cope with the emergency, he must declare an end. There's not a county in California that has its healthcare system overwhelmed by this disease. We're not in a state of emergency by definition.
And then what is it that counties can do from your perspective, and what are you guys doing legally to go back against that, knowing that it's basically unjust?
Unfortunately, we have in this state, we have allowed such regulatory control at the state level of so many of the mechanisms of our economy that even if we say to our businesses, hey, go ahead and open up, the governor has already directly threatened through his alcohol beverage control and through Department of Cosmetology. They have directly been threatening business. I've had businesses send me the letters that they've received saying, hey, just because your locality might think it's okay to open up, your liquor license is in jeopardy if you do, or your cosmetology license is in jeopardy if you do. So they're threatening businesses using the mechanisms of the state.
We've heard the same here in Orange County as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so essentially, you feel that the state of emergency is over in Placer County and a number of counties.
It's over statewide.
Right. It's over statewide.
There is no state of emergency.
Right. But especially, especially counties such as yours. And I would say maybe probably like Orange County where we are, where we just haven't been hit very hard. You're saying that you guys don't have any sort of recourse or authority to end the state of emergency and allow everything to return to normal. That's all in the hands of the governor.
That's right. And think of, beautiful Placer County. We go from, about 200 feet above sea level down here at the county line with Sacramento County. We go all the way up to 40% of the surface area of Lake Tahoe is in Placer County. Squaw Valley, Alpine Meadows, North Star, all of North Lake Tahoe and the west shore of Lake Tahoe are all in Placer County. Right now, they should be booked up solid for the summer. Yeah. Everybody thinks about skiing in Tahoe. It's really the summer where they make their money. They're vacant. They're not even taking reservations right now because they don't know when because the governor's made it clear that even though he's letting some counties, quote unquote, accelerate through phase 2, Placer County is the largest county that got that status. And I think it's more than a coincidence that we're the ones banging on this the hardest, and we were allowed to go move through stage 2 because I think he's hoping to keep us quiet. He's made it clear we're moving into stage 3 together. Well, stage 3 is lodging. That's our hotels. That's all of our folks up in Tahoe. We will decimate the Tahoe economy. Decimate it. Those businesses are gone and never coming back.
He said and I don't know for sure, but he said that the whole state will move into stage 3 together. That won't be individualized per county.
That's right. That was his message a week and a half ago. Now, we also know that his message a week and a half ago could be completely different tomorrow, because that's something else that he's been doing. Is he's been moving the goalposts. You know, we had one testing threshold, and then it's a different testing threshold. We had one tracers threshold, and that don't get me started on that.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, like you're saying, because at the time that people were protesting the beaches being closed and these lawsuits coming from Orange County coming up there because he was basically holding us hostage as far as our beaches, but everybody else was open. Then a day later, 2 days later, he changes his mind and says, okay, we're moving on. And everybody thinks, okay, we're moving into the next phase. Businesses are going to reopen. And then he comes out with a long list of things, the criteria that you have to meet to do that, which is unattainable. And so you're absolutely right. He tends to go back and forth, back and forth. He makes you think that you're going to be getting some new freedoms and back to life, and then he takes it back away again. And that's been extremely frustrating for residents of this state.
You're right. And and this is what I keep trying to get my colleagues to focus on. He only is able to do that because he is keeping us in this declared state of emergency.
Right.
That's why the only mechanism here is to fight on that point. We have got a county. There's got to be a county somewhere that can get 3 votes. I've got a great legal outfit up here called the Pacific Justice Institute. They've been looking into my claims. Their chief counsel thinks I'm absolutely right on the law. And he said all that would be needed is for a board of supervisors. He doesn't think that I, as an individual supervisor, have standing. He thinks it will require a vote of the board of supervisors to request what's described as an extraordinary writ of mandamus that would get filed with a local courthouse. You can do it in your own county court, and basically stop the governor from being able to issue any new executive orders while this is being reviewed. And then have a judge just look at the plain language of the law and say, we're not in a state of emergency.
And you mentioned Attorney General Barr and his discussions earlier, where he said that as the country, from the country's national standpoint, that they want to be able to potentially go after these governors that are not allowing states to open up. And you talked about this letter that you had received that basically threatened your county's disaster relief funds if you continue to speak out against the governor. Can you were talking about how you thought this letter could be the thing that Attorney General Barr might be able to use. Can you tell everybody who hasn't seen your video on this what was in that letter and why you think Attorney General Barr might be able to use this to be able to stop this uncontested executive order that we're seeing from Governor Newsom? Sure.
So on I forget which Tuesday it was a few weeks ago, our board adopted that resolution that I described, which called upon the governor to end the state of emergency statewide because he can't meet the definition. So that was on a Tuesday. On a Wednesday, we packaged that up and sent it to the governor's office. I then sent a separate email to the governor and copied the Attorney General Javier Becerra here in California. And essentially in my email to them, I just said, by what authority are you controlling counties at this point? We're not in a state of emergency. I laid out the facts and simply told him, you need to end this now. Well, I didn't hear back from the governor. I heard back from the director of the Office of Emergency Services, Mark Ghilarducci, who sent me a letter on Friday of that week, where he'd obviously had some staff doing quite a bit of research, because he's got seven different footnotes of county board votes and all the rest, where as he points out, and he actually bolded it in his letter, you voted to ratify the proclamation on March 9th.
Right.
Well, yeah, on March 9th, yes, I did. You're right. It's April now, Mark, the end of April. We're 2 months later, and the data doesn't support this. So, yes, I did. But then he goes on, and this was the really interesting part. He wrote, I caution that your improvident rhetoric in your missive may jeopardize your county's access to disaster relief and other funding meant to mitigate the effects of emergencies.
Wow.
My rhetoric.
Wow.
Because he doesn't like what I said. My words hurt his feelings. Because he doesn't like what I said, he's going to withhold our county's access to disaster relief and other funding.
Which is a threat. I mean, that's a threat.
Yes.
That is the definition of tyranny.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so now that you received that letter, and that letter obviously becomes personal, because this is no longer about, hey, we're trying to support your county. Go ahead and provide us with the data that would make us, believe that you're at a place where you can move forward. This was a personal threat of, you continue to speak out and we're going to find ways to hurt you, other ways to hurt you. And, so in what we've done as we've fought mandates as it relates to medical mandates, we have seen legislators, state senators and assembly members who have told our colleagues directly that I was basically threatened to, if I vote against my party, if I vote yes on this, on no on this, whatever the measure was, that they will have money taken away, funding taken away. They will be taken off committees. They will, this is kind of like these backdoor dealings that you hear about with politics, is how can I use my power to convince you to go along with what I want you to do? And if you dare speak out against that, even if you know it's to be, this is the truth, that there is a risk in doing that. And they're trying to let you know, whichever way that is, that you might be punished or scolded for your, outlying opinion. And of course, that's extremely dangerous, because we're supposed to be based on information and fact, and you're supposed to be representing the residents of Placer County. You're supposed to be doing that job. You're not supposed to be keeping people happy, within the government and keeping your mouth shut in order to do that. That's just not how freedom of speech is supposed to work. What kind of backlash have you seen now from being so outspoken? And are you seeing any support that you didn't expect from sharing your views?
Yeah, I will say that the support that I've received far outweighs the backlash. I do have some people. I had one email from somebody asking me if I wanted to have all the dead bodies stacked on my front lawn, and all the blah blah blah. So I do have the haters out there who are saying that all I'm going to do is kill people in the name of capitalism, and yet the support really has been overwhelming, and from both sides of the aisle. I will tell you that there are. I am a registered Republican. We run for county supervisor as nonpartisan seats, but I'm a registered Republican. In fact, my dad worked for Governor Reagan. That's what brought us up to Northern California in 1970. But I'm getting all kinds of very positive feedback from my registered Democrat friends as well. And, you mentioned the legislators themselves feeling like they could be threatened if they engage. The reason that I think that people, that the legislature is being held out of session, they're not being allowed to meet, is the second half of this section of 8629, which I read to you, which says the governor shall proclaim the termination of state emergency at the earliest possible date conditions warrant, goes on to read this. All of the powers granted the governor by this chapter with respect to a state of emergency shall terminate when the state of emergency has been terminated by proclamation of the governor or by concurrent resolution of the legislature, declaring it at an end. If the legislature were in session,
right,
a member of the House and a member of the Senate could get together and introduce a resolution and force a vote declaring this at an end. And I guarantee you the Democratic control of both houses of the state of California are keeping the legislature out so that doesn't happen, because they don't want their members to have to go on the record with a vote.
Wow. That's amazing. Who decides to keep the legislature out of session?
The Speaker of the Assembly and the President of the Senate.
I think, right? Isn't that Tony Atkins?
Yeah, so it'd be the Democratic majority leaders of the two sections.
The Speaker.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. We do hear a lot about this. The response to COVID-19 kind of differing according to party lines. But have you spoken with a number of Democratic colleagues? And are you hearing kind of what their opinions are? Do some of their opinions line up with yours? Okay.
Only at the local level. I have not spoken to any Democrat legislators.
Okay. Well, what are you hearing on the local level from Democrats?
Oh, they agree completely.
Wow.
Yeah, I found that this entire argument as it relates to coronavirus has really been presented completely differently, whether you're looking through a Democratic lens or a Republican lens. And the same is true for the media. The way that we've seen this virus and the pandemic, and whether or not this is a public health crisis or not, portrayed is based on political party, which it should not be. However, it is absolutely broken into two sides here. And you've got one side saying that people are dying left and right. We have to keep this lockdown happening, money over lives, just like you said. And then we have another side saying this is overblown. The data doesn't back this up. Our economy is being broken in ways that will end up with more deaths than the virus itself. And we're seeing this very politically split. And what I'm noticing is people I know who watch liberal news, and I'm an independent, but people that watch liberal news are much more fearful of the virus, and people that watch conservative-based news are much more interested in opening the economy back up and fearing for what's going to happen to everybody as it relates to their livelihoods. And it's a little scary to me when I think about how our American views can be shaped and our belief system can be shaped so much by what political leaders and media are giving us as it relates to something that should be a medical discussion. This should be a very straight up and down medical discussion based on fact. But that's not what we're seeing.
No.
Yeah, Kirk, what are you hearing from your new public health director? If you've hired one, or if you have an interim one?
No, we still have the same. Say she changed her position and kept her job. Let's just.
I see.
So I'm not really hearing much because again we're not in any kind of an active state of emergency. So really not much. I'm not hearing a lot.
But did you say earlier that from as far as you hearing from local Democrats, you feel like they agree with you?
Oh, absolutely.
They're agreeing with you on kind of on a local level.
Yeah, because they're looking at how their local cities and counties are directly being affected by the economic shutdown.
Yeah.
Cities are feeling it immediately, right? Cities are sales tax, more sales tax oriented than counties. Counties are property tax. So we, at the county level, we won't really feel the net effect of this for another year or so when we start seeing property values drop, led by a decimated commercial sector. When you have, as the NFIB estimated, possibly as many as 60% of all small businesses might end up being shut down by this, and not coming back, you're going to see a tremendous drop in the value of commercial properties. And then that, of course, has a trickle-down effect to the residential side. You have people are losing jobs, escrows are falling out. Folks who were moving forward with buying homes are not moving forward with buying new homes now because things are so uncertain. And so we're going to see a dramatic drop in our assessed valuation at the county level, which will affect our ability to provide services ongoing. And that's what we've got to get people focused on is, here and now, we do have some people who need our help. But our healthcare system has plenty of capacity to help those people. We're not overwhelming the system that is set up for the purpose of helping those people. But what we are doing is we're obliterating our ability to help all of our citizens for years to come because we're tanking our revenues.
Right. So what do you personally think is behind Newsom's decision to extend the state of emergency and to keep the lockdown going in a state that obviously did not experience a huge outbreak? What do you think is really going on behind this? Or what can you share? What can you share of what you believe?
I wish I knew because it is for somebody with my kind of life view of how government should work. This is just it's inexplicable. It is utterly inexplicable that anybody would want to perpetuate this state of chaos. And that's really what we've got is a governor that is intent on perpetuating this. For what reason? Certainly not for valid public health reasons.
Do you think it's possible it's political?
I think if it's not for valid public health reasons, what other option
Mm-hmm.
is it? It's got to be political.
The same thing. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, why would a governor want to purposely tank the economy? Because I've been saying the same thing that you're saying. The data doesn't line up. And there's no excuse to keep our economies halted like this. And it seems that it is politically motivated, that they're stopping it for a reason. And people say, well, what kind of governor would do that? Why would you ever want your residents to be unemployed or dependent upon government or whatever it is? And I haven't had the answers either. Just like you're saying, I've always
Well,
said, I don't know.
I think we got a little glimpse last week when the governor announced that he's asking the federal government for a $1 trillion
Yes.
bailout.
Yes.
Because that bailout is not just for quote unquote COVID related issues.
Right.
That is to shore up the pension system that there's no way the state is ever going to be able to pay the bill for this ridiculous pension system that we still have in this state. And that is what was contained within that $1 trillion bailout ask.
And do you think that's why he basically created the Western States Pact to be able to ask for this? Because I thought that was the oddest thing when I first saw him saying, I'm going to come together with Washington and Oregon so we can all open up together. I'm thinking to myself, what do these other states have to do with our economy? Every economy is unique. The only reason that you bind together that way is to have more power. And
Right.
I thought it was odd. And then, yes, a couple weeks later, he's asking for $1 trillion in relief. But I find that so odd because he's asking for relief in a state that he's basically putting into distress.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I was thinking about this yesterday, and it's kind of like he's already blown a hole in one foot, and he's demanding that we patch up that foot while he's taking aim at the other foot.
I wonder if the Democratic majority here in California is going to lose a lot of their voting base over this issue, because everyone's going to lose their houses, their livelihood, their income, and it's going to affect Republicans and Democrats equally statewide. And so I don't understand. I mean, I see them having a lot of political motives, but unless they can convince all their Democratic voters that they've made the right decisions on this, and that yes, COVID-19 was worth everyone losing their livelihoods and tanking the entire economy for months on end, if not years. Unless they can convince everyone that they made the right decision, they are going to lose a lot of their voting base, and that might affect California in the future.
I guarantee you that is the reason why the legislature is not going into session, because they know the minute they were to go into session, I know personally at least two Republican legislators, one in the Assembly and one in the Senate, who are going to introduce a resolution at the first available opportunity and force a vote. And that is what they are trying to protect their members from. They do not want their members to have to go on the record and say that, yes, on, May whatever date or June whatever date, 3 months after all this nonsense started, I voted to keep it going. That's when you would see blood in the streets politically for that party. But absent an actual on the record vote, it's going to be harder to tie these people to it.
And so were you surprised when you saw Newsom's decision to decide on mail-in voting for the presidential election coming up?
Oh, not at all.
And didn't that sort of seem like that was part of all this?
They set this up perfectly with the ballot harvesting law that they got passed here in California, where chain of custody is no longer an issue. It used to be that if you had a ballot that was mailed to you, you had to personally deliver that ballot. You had to sign and attest that it was you that filled it out before you sent it in. None of all those requirements on delivering ballots has all gone away. And now anybody can deliver a ballot for you. And so what they did very effectively in 2018 was a ballot harvesting operation where they went door to door in the heavy Democrat areas. They knocked on doors of people that they know historically don't vote, right? They're registered to vote. Of course, it all starts with a motor voter. Everybody who registers or even talks to the DMV now gets registered to vote. So they went door to door in areas where they knew people were not voting and were not going to vote, and basically just said, hey, we know you haven't voted, so just give us your ballot. We know you got mailed one, so just give us your ballot. We're going to go turn it in for you. and they voted the ballots. That's how we lost 6 congressional seats in California.
Wow.
And so it does kind of seem like this state of emergency is basically another opportunity to be making decisions. And like you're saying, inside that $1 trillion request is going to be things that affect the state in other ways that people are not even aware of and no legislature is voting on, because this is all kind of happening. The same thing with the federal stimulus as well. You've got these other things that are being thrown in there that most people aren't aware of. Meanwhile, your average Joe, or what they say, people on Main Street, so to speak, your small businesses, a lot of these people did not get any part of the small business stimulus. That money ran out really quickly. And many people haven't seen even a penny of unemployment or federal relief or any kind of state relief. And meanwhile, you have LA County with their public health officer, Barbara Ferrer, however you say her last name, deciding that this might be another 3 months. Another 3 months from this point, and they already have a 50% unemployment rate in LA.
Right. And we know by virtue of their own statistics that the LA County hospitals are in no way being adversely impacted by this, meaning being overrun. They are being adversely impacted, as you pointed out, because the revenue generating procedures are not being held.
Right. Well, it's interesting. People who are not getting any stimulus money, they're feeling the pressure more and more. They're being financially devastated. So they're going to be affected by this long term, the longer this goes on. But what I find interesting is people who are receiving stimulus money, basically, the government's paying them to stay home and to be happy about staying home. That wears on people. And that kind of like you start to lose your dignity. You start to become like a ward of the state, so to speak. You're like, we're designed as people to get out there and provide and earn money, earn a living, and be in charge of ourselves. And I think everyone's being hurt by this, whether you're receiving stimulus money or not. Yeah, the money is nice in the short term, but what is that doing to our psyche and our drive? To get out there and succeed and work hard and provide for your families and do something good for society. And so I see, both sides of this being heard. And so it's funny, the governor says, if you're sitting around at home, go out and volunteer, go out and volunteer for something.
And that's not a public health risk. It's totally fine to be around big groups of people volunteering. Yeah. You're just not allowed to make an income for yourself or your family.
Right, exactly.
Right, exactly. I hope that our federal government denies California that $1 trillion ask that the governor sent in, because I think that's going to be bad for us in the long run.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, do you think that there is a risk to these people that are now getting paid more? Some people are actually getting paid more to stay home. Is there a risk to our workforce now to create this type of situation where people no longer want to go to work? Right. Some companies are losing employees because they're getting paid more to stay at home. And is anybody stopping to think, where is this money coming from? Like, we're already in debt as a state. We're in debt as a nation. Nobody's talking about this idea of printing more money and what that's going to do to the value of money and how it's going to affect future generations. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, you touched on a couple of different things there. Number one, the breakdown of the supply chain. What is the supply chain? The supply chain is really just a fancy term for how I get stuff. Right. That's really what the supply chain breaks down to. And part of how I get stuff is a labor component. And if the labor component is artificially depressed because anybody who got laid off for 4 months is going to make more money laid off than they were making for the 4 months prior when they were working, you have just taken away the ability to deliver goods and services at the retail level because people are now making more money not working than they did for the 4 months prior while they were working. So you have just affected artificially by action of government, you've just affected the supply chain. So retail establishments and restaurants that might want to open are not able to because they can't get employees. I've got a business, a nice little restaurant less than a mile away from where I'm sitting right now, who is still doing only takeout because they can't get their employees to come back.
Wow. Kirk, you've been at this for many years in your position as a county supervisor, and we appreciate that. But you know what you're talking about. You've been doing this for a very long time, and you know how your county is being impacted by this on a financial level and a political level. And I'd like to know, what would you like other people, other residents of your county and other counties, the voters and the constituents, where can people reach out to have their voices heard? I mean, do they speak to their own county supervisors?
Yeah,
Do they try to
yeah.
speak
Right
directly to
now,
the governor?
what we really need right now is at least one county, hopefully more than one county, to get on board with the idea of telling the governor he is acting outside of his authority, calling on him to end the state of emergency as our board has done, but then be willing to take the next step and actually go to court and file the extraordinary writ of mandamus to get this into a judge's hands so that a judge can look at the plain letter of the law. And this is where's Javier Becerra on all this? Can Javier take 5 minutes out from suing the Trump administration to actually enforce our state law?
Wow.
That's his
Yeah.
job as our state attorney general, but he seems to spend all his time suing Trump. So I just, yes, I think that the best avenue right now is for folks to learn who their county supervisor is and reach out to their county supervisor and say, enough, declare an end to the state of emergency and file the extraordinary writ of mandamus that's required to get this thing into a judge's hands.
Right. So anybody could just go online and type in their county, just the count, say, whatever county, Orange County Board of Supervisors. You'll see their website. You'll see how to contact them. You can call, you can email, show up at their meetings. I mean, why don't you tell me? I mean, you guys have meetings every week or so. What happens if there's a crowd of 500 people outside, demanding for reopening? Does that influence you guys? Do you guys hear that message?
That's huge. Absolutely huge. Yes.
All right. So people need to start doing that. You need to start showing up.
Now
person.
Melissa knows what's on my calendar for next week. Organize a protest at county board level. Thank you for that.
The one other thing that I might just add, if I may, is when, there's going to be time to look back on this and make some judgment calls. But the one thing that I want people, as they are looking at casting a vote in November, whether it is for city council, county supervisor, state assembly, state senate, United States Congress — we don't have a Senate race here in California this year — or the president of the United States, whatever the office is, I encourage people to evaluate their actions of the elected officials, their elected officials, in one of two buckets. Those who sought to consolidate power in a command and control fashion and grow the power of government through this, versus those of us who agreed to temporarily sacrifice our individual liberty for the greater good, but then fought like hell to re-secure the individual liberty.
And it's interesting because we have seen across the nation a very clear distinction between states with governors that are Democratic versus Republican on their stance on the lockdown and how long they're having this lockdown go down, whether or not they're reopening the economy. Like, this has really been a very clear political divide. Do you think that they're trying to, let's say the states with Democratic governors like ours, do you think they're trying to extend this until November?
I don't know if they can extend it to November, but you got to the question of the why, right? And as I hope people remember that every single elected official, public health professional that's standing in front of a camera or a microphone telling us that our businesses are, that are closing and jobs being lost and the damage is being done to our economy, telling us that that is necessary, every one of those people is still getting a paycheck.
Right.
Yes.
Every single one is still getting a paycheck while we're seeing this economic devastation. And those who've been occupying the camera lenses and the microphones, imploring them to heed their warnings, they will never be more relevant than they are right now.
You're absolutely right.
Is it in their interest that the crisis end? if the crisis is over, Gavin Newsom doesn't get a noon press conference every day.
You're absolutely right. A lot of people had no idea really who he was. They were not familiar with him, even though he's been a governor of the state already for 2 years. This has made him, and I mean, obviously everybody knows he has a desire to run for president, or that's the rumor, that he's trying to become a household name. And you're seeing the same thing I see with Cuomo. You're seeing some of these people really stepping up, like you're saying, and using this as a chance to have a national limelight. My concern, if you're looking at the longer extension here, from a public health standpoint, what sense does it make to reopen the economy in the fall, right when the flu season's about to start? When we understand that the cases are not going anywhere, they're just going to be prolonged. You're literally encouraging people, not you, but this philosophy is encouraging people to open up and start mingling with the world right when we have another very contagious virus going around. And to me, I can't help but think that is somehow by design to extend another surge, another lockdown. I don't know. There's something behind this that does not come down to public health. And that's why I've been led to think that this is, political in what way? Like you're saying, I don't know the specifics. I'm not privy to the conversations that are happening in these closed doors and on these phones between the people that are making these decisions. But I know it has to be something. And I have been speaking out, just like you've been speaking out, because the data says one thing, and you're at least being a voice for the residents in your county and across the state, and in other states even, have been sharing your videos because they feel like they're part of that group of people that is not being recognized. And that's the group of businesses or those who've lost their income, lost their livelihood, and now are not able to put food on the table. This is something I argued early on. For some reason, people have a really hard time stepping outside of their little bubble and looking at the grand scheme of things. They're not looking at the long term. And just like you said, this economic devastation, it's not going to be immediate. You're not going to see people in the streets starving. That doesn't happen now. That comes in the next months and years to follow. And we have to make decisions now that are affecting and supporting our residents and citizens of this country for the next 5 and 10 years. We have to make these tough decisions for what happens in the long haul. Why do you think people have such a hard time being able to see down the line versus just being right caught up in the moment right now?
That is probably a bigger philosophical question as to how we live our lives these days, with everything microwaved and available to us instantly through Amazon Prime. We just, the ability to plan things long term, it seems to be a lost art. When my kids come to me and say, "Hey, Dad, is it okay if I go to the movie with my friends?" And then literally 2 minutes later, "Oh, we're not going to the movies. We're going to Jim's house." And then it's 2 minutes later, "Oh, that fell through. We're not doing that." Nobody plans because everybody's available instantly. So we're all right now in the moment. What am I doing right now in the moment? And I don't have to plan for next week or next year. And the larger we grow government and allow government to step in and take over what should be the appropriate roles of properly provided for families by parents, and the more we acquiesce to the government taking over some of those roles, the worse it's just going to get.
And so what do you think right now, if you could give advice to citizens of the state? People have been protesting, obviously, to try to show power in numbers and understand the liberties are at risk here and how important it is to reopen the economy so people can put food on the table. What do you think is the most effective thing that people can be doing in California or in other states?
Just not letting up on contacting their local elected officials. You've got to demand action from your local elected officials. That's where you have the greatest accessibility, greatest recourse. And at this point, all 58 counties should be telling the governor, "We got this," because there's not a single county in this state whose medical system within the county is overwhelmed and they are unable to handle it. Every single county in the state should be demanding that the governor release the state of emergency.
And so when you say local elected officials, who does that entail?
City and county. Your city and county. Yeah, unfortunately, the state legislature is kind of a lost cause right now. This is a battle at the local level. Reach out to your city council member, reach out to your county supervisor.
Yeah. What about your city mayors?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the mayor.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. When I say city council, it includes the mayor.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yes,
city council
but yes,
members,
absolutely.
mayors, and then your board of supervisors.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good advice. It's interesting what you just said about looking at the short term versus long term plans. And I feel like, and I was guilty of this, originally. I feel like, yeah, we all felt good about doing our part with the shutdown and protecting the vulnerable, protecting the elderly. And yeah, sure, I'll stay home for 2 or 3 weeks so we can get a handle on this. I feel like that was sort of, a lot of people agreed on that short-term plan. Melissa did not. Melissa first saw all the problems that could come of that kind of acquiescence and that kind of, giving the government that short-term power. But now we're stuck. The government has that power over us in the state of emergency. And so now I think everyone who is a voter for the party who is propagating that viewpoint, now they're kind of stuck. They're like, do I keep voting for my Democratic leaders because that's the party I support? But now I kind of don't agree with them dragging this out for 3-6 months, 1 or 2 more years. Who knows how long it's going to be? At what point do people of all parties come together and say there is a clear direction for us as a nation now? Our leaders, on one side are not taking us in that direction. They're taking us in a direction that's going to cause way more harm than good. And are a lot of people going to come to that realization and shift the politics of our country? And I don't know if they will, but I certainly hope so. I mean, for me, I want life to get back to normal. I don't want our society to change. I don't want us to become a society of fear. And if our kids, I don't want our kids to learn to be too afraid to go out and play with each other and, be afraid to go up and hug their friends. And, you've seen pictures of kids on playgrounds at schools, sitting in their own little square 6 feet away from each other. And, kids, afraid to go to school and play. I mean, we have to return to a normal society. There cannot be a new normal. And if citizens accept, Governor Newsom's and other Democrats' version of what new normal looks like and think that that's okay, that's going to hurt us for decades to come if our society changes that drastically over this.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Following up on that, the last question I have for you and that we have for you today is I've seen so one thing in the vaccine mandate world, which is the thing we tend to talk about the most here, we see a lot of media sound bites. We see phrases like safe and effective. We see right away things like vaccines don't cause autism. There are certain phrases every single media outlet will use as it relates to this topic that you can tell are provided. What I have also seen with this is we're seeing the other sound bites. And so I want to just to kind of speaking of the new normal, that's one of them. Right. We're seeing these public health officers. I've seen the LA public health officer say, this is going to be a new normal. We see governors talking about their phases in reopening, saying phase 4 is the new normal. And this has now become a media soundbite, along with we are all in this together, which of course we're all not in this together because many of us are not receiving a paycheck and are not able to put food on the table. And like you said, the ones that are screaming for the extended lockdown are receiving income and they're not in the same boat. And the last one that from a data standpoint kind of bothers me is the stay home, save lives, because now we're seeing data show us, just like Governor Cuomo said, close to 70% of the new hospitalizations are those who are sheltering in place. And we're finding out that vitamin D has a big role in whether or not you're going to end up in the ICU with a COVID case. And so these 3 sound bites are something I've definitely taken issue with because they feel it feels like part of a PR campaign to make everybody feel good about what's going on. I would love, as we close with this, kind of your take on the media spin, the sound bites, and what do you think of those phrases?
Well, I appreciate more than your pushback against this concept of a quote unquote new normal. We didn't arrive at what was normal, what we all knew to be normal, by virtue of any kind of government edict. We did it because it's human nature. We interact with each other in a fashion that has evolved over how many years? That's what normal is, and that's what normal will be again. There will not be a new normal because this one epidemic is not going to change human nature. Humans are a social animal by our nature. We get together in crowds and we cheer on sporting teams. We do things like that, and we will continue to do things like that in spite of government edicts. And so the people who are using the expression new normal, that's just another way of saying consolidating government power and limiting individual liberty. Mm-hmm. Every time you hear we have to expect a new normal, hear the words instead, I want to take away your individual liberty.
Yeah,
and isn't that scary?
That was very scary. Yeah, well, this has been a fantastic episode. I learned a lot about the role of county supervisors, and Kirk Uhler, again, the county supervisor for Placer County. It's been awesome to have you on this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating. Yeah, so I love being able to just have access to someone at your level of government, because you're like in the trenches doing the day-to-day work of your county. And that's very much appreciated, but it's great to get your viewpoint as someone who's actively working on this. You're not like living the politics of this. You're just in the day-to-day grind of somebody representing their county, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you, and I know many would agree with this, for being willing to be a voice that's unpopular, because it's the right thing to do, and it's the right thing to be talking about, and you're trying to perpetuate a discussion and trying to open up and facilitate people discussing something that's uncomfortable, and again, it's unpopular, but your character is holding true to what you believe is right, regardless of what's being pushed around you. And I applaud you for not being willing to be silenced just to make certain people happy. And I know other people feel the same way. I think you're probably encouraging other people, whether it's in a level of local politics or just an average citizen, to find their voice and be willing to speak out about this also, because as we know, we will go nowhere unless we all kind of join on this together and speak out together, just like you've mentioned. So I applaud you for doing that. It can be really difficult to be the black sheep. And when you know what you know, and you really truly believe in your heart that something is wrong here, and you feel it's important to speak out, you have no other choice. So I applaud you for doing that. And thank you for continuing to be a voice for this discussion.
Well, Melissa and Dr. Bob, I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to chat with you guys and share with your listeners my perspective on this. So thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you, guys.
Yeah, Kirk, where can people follow you on social media, or kind of be in touch with you if you want them to be?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm on Facebook, and fortunately there aren't too many Kirk Uhlers out there. So if somebody just looks up KIRKUHLER, you'll see my official government page. And Twitter is just at Kirk Uhler on Twitter.
All right, awesome.
That's great. Well, I'll continue to follow you and look forward to the content that you're putting out. I appreciate your time today so much.
Thank you, guys.
Well, this has been the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob and
special
Kirk
guest.
Uhler. So we will catch you guys next time.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.